Hello folks, welcome back. This is the third and final installment of the Financial Literacy Training Sessions. You've been working hard to get ready for this tournament the last few weeks, and we're now in the last leg of things. With just a few days left before the tournament, I wanted to make this video to help you polish any last-minute changes that you might want to make before jumping into the competition. We'll start with some review of the general case structure and rebuttal speeches, and then we'll talk about some of the common mistakes that I've noticed while visiting some of your practices. And then finally, we'll close out with some frequently asked questions that I saw across the different schools competing this weekend. Let's jump straight into it. So, like I mentioned a moment ago, the first thing that we'll be going over is the case structure. At this point, your cases should already be done, but there's probably a couple of small tweaks that you can make to it that'll make it that much better. Let's make sure you're hitting all the marks. As a reminder, there's a few things that you're going to want to focus on. First, this series focuses on personal decisions, not policy options. When we say the focus is on personal decisions, this means that the impacts you articulate need to prioritize how they affect the subject of the resolution, a student who's entering college for the first time. This also applies when talking about your rebuttal and closing speeches. One thing I've noticed in practices that I've visited in the last couple weeks is that most of you are doing a good job citing statistics and articulating their significance, but not many of you are taking the next step to connect those general statistics to an individual level. I think being able to do that will help you win a few more of these impact clashes this weekend. Second, there will be an emphasis on your analysis and persuasiveness. It's one thing to have all the facts, it's another thing to know how to use them. How should we interpret your evidence, and why does that evidence support your case? The answer to these questions might seem obvious, but they're only obvious to you because you've been working very hard on your cases for the last few weeks to the point where you're just very familiar with your cases and your evidence. Turn as many points as possible. Err towards over-explaining instead of leaning on assumptions or shortcuts. The more you spell it out, even for simple financial concepts that you think are common knowledge, the clearer your understanding of financial concepts become. In a moment, we'll review the ballot. The biggest chunk of your points that you could earn comes from being able to articulate your understanding of financial concepts, even the simple ones. Third, clash is on case only with no surprises. All cases need to be turned in by Friday. This is not a policy debate. There are no off-case arguments, and any refutations that you make during your rebuttal speeches need to be direct responses to your opponent's claims. You won't get ahead in these debates by being tricky. You will get ahead in these debates by being articulate and persuasive. Finally, your analysis should logically connect contentions to personal financial benefits. Some of you are doing a good job with your impacts, but not all of them connect back to the financial impact of the decision that you're defending. The most common one that I saw is in people's four-year cases. A lot of people were making strong arguments for why going to a 4-year leads to having a better experience in college, being able to travel abroad, and things like that. But not many of you were tying that back to the financial impact and why that would be a smart financial decision. I'm not pointing out these contentions to try to dissuade you from going for them. Rather, you should continue to build them and make sure you always connect them back to the financial implications. Okay? Next, I want to run through the structure one more time. I want to make sure that everyone has a good grasp of who's speaking and when they speak. This is a 2-on-2 debate. If you are the first speaker, you give the case speech and closing speech for your side of the debate. And if you're the second speaker, you give the questions during cross-ex and deliver the rebuttal speech. If you're the first speaker for your side of the debate, this means you're giving the constructive speech. Both constructives should only focus on your case. You should not respond to your opponent's case until the rebuttal speeches. I know this will feel a little bit weird where you're used to going affirmative, then negative, then affirmative, then negative, but this debate is structured a bit differently for a good reason. So it's not an affirmative case versus the negative case. Rather, it is two competing options. So they both need to be set up as if they're 1ACs. If you start to refute your opponent's case earlier than the rebuttal speech, it's only going to hurt your partner's score. This is because you'll start to use arguments that they'll need and that they're being graded on their ballot. And anyway, you've got plenty of stuff that you need to cover during your 6 minutes. The case needs to have 2 or 3 contentions, which are the main arguments for your side of the debate. It needs to be supported by evidence and it needs to be clearly organized. You should remember from your guide to make sure that every case has a short introductory paragraph that includes an identification of the speaker and the speaker's school, a statement of the resolution and which side of it you're on, an overview of the framework of the case and terms which the debate should be judged by. Some people had some questions about what did the guide mean by a framework here. The most common one that I've seen debaters use is the question of the long-term financial impact versus the short-term financial impact. Most of the 2-year cases that I've reviewed make the strategic choice to frame the debate around short-term costs. This is a strength of the 2-year side of the debate because the 2-year objectively has lower upfront costs. This means you spend less upfront, and that's a clear line to a better financial decision. Inversely, what I've seen a lot of 4-year cases do is frame the debate through the long-term financial implications of their decision. Most 4-year cases are going to put an emphasis on long-term earning potential and prestige and networking. That's definitely a strength of the 4-year side of this debate. For these debates, when we talk about framing, it's just a question of how do we perceive our finances? At the end of the day, neither one is right or wrong, but you want to make the strategic decision to use a framing and articulation that matches your case best. The framing that works best for you will depend on the contentions that you decided to go for. And one quick tip, something that you could do that would be really strategic is to use even if statements. In the case of this framing, an even if statement would say, even if you believe my opponent's framing of the debate, here's a reason why you would still vote for our side. And then you would give a reason why. This is very helpful because it helps the judge see how you could win even if you're not winning. After the introduction, you'll need to include contentions. The contentions should be independent arguments in support of your side of the debate. The contention should give specific reasons why the judge should side with you and your side of the debate. Your contentions need to be developed with your own analysis, but also be sure to include evidence that supports your claims. Like I mentioned earlier, you want to err on the side of over-explaining instead of under-explaining. No shorthand here. You don't want to lean on common knowledge or anything like that. You're being evaluated on how well you articulate your financial knowledge and what new information you've gained while preparing for this tournament. The contention should be made up primarily of analysis and explanation with evidence playing a supporting role, unlike in policy debates where you read a lot of evidence. When citing evidence in your case speeches, direct quotes shouldn't be more than 2 or 3 short lines. I'm sure this is very different than what you're used to where you would read whole cards. Finally, your case needs to have a conclusion. Each case should have a short concluding paragraph that sums up your side's best arguments, and you always want to remind the judge of the framework you established when you started that speech. After both case speeches, there's a cross-examination period. Later in this video, I'm going to talk about some of the frequently asked questions around cross-examination, as well as some hints and tips for getting the maximum amount of points from your cross-ex. After the case and cross-examination period, you enter the rebuttal speeches. This is where you should be responding to your opponent's case. Not only should you be responding to your opponent's case, but it's the only thing you should be doing. Don't extend your case in the rebuttals. Rather, you should be spending that time directly responding to your opponent's case. The negative rebuttal should refute the affirmative case, but not defend or extend the negative case. The rebuttal speech should refute your opponent's case, but don't extend or defend your case yet. The most effective way to do this will be with line-by-line refutation, or they said this, we say that type of structure. After the rebuttals is the closing summary. The closing summary should give reasons why you win the debate and extend your case while closing doors for your opponent. In the closing summary, you want to narrow down to a few contentions, or at least the ones that you think are most likely to persuade the judge. You don't need to extend all the contentions that you have from your case speech, just the most strategic ones. The closing statement should summarize and crystallize main arguments in the debate and extend 1 or 2 of the case contentions. I'm sure you all have a good understanding of how the debate goes by now, so I'll move on to reviewing the ballot. This is what the judges will be evaluating you on. As a reminder, the full ballot is available in your student guide on page 9. This is how the debate will be scored. Notice how knowledge of financial concepts has the highest reward in terms of points on this ballot. Financial concepts are emphasized on this ballot, but also Speaker 1 and Speaker 2 have differences in their rubrics. Judges will use the full range of the possible score, with the middle representing an average score. Therefore, you may see anything from a 1 to a 10 in any of these categories, or if we're looking at the knowledge of financial concepts, anywhere between a 1 and 20. Let's talk about each of these metrics a little bit closer. The first thing you'll be evaluated on is your knowledge of financial concepts. The judge will ask themselves, which team showed more command of financial concepts? During your speeches, you should err on the side of over-explaining and defining the terms you use. This will help highlight your understanding of these financial concepts. So, for example, if you wrote a contention about the cost of loans, describing the financial implications of taking out loans or how loans work will help boost your score in this area. Second is the use of evidence and logic. For this, the judge will ask themselves, do your contentions make sense internally? Do you effectively cite your sources and correctly apply them? Do you tie your arguments to their financial implication? Whichever team has a better constructed, more persuasively argued position here is likely going to get ahead with these points. The more you show your understanding of this evidence and ability to analyze what its point is, the judge might also ask themselves, which team did a better job of analyzing the evidence to make conclusions about factual claims? Some of you have cited evidence. To take it to the next step, tell me what the implication of that evidence is and analyze it. How does it apply? The next section is speaking style and persuasiveness. This is where your personal touch and style will shine through. Remember, this is a public format debate and your judge will be evaluating your style. For those of you with the policy debate background, my number one tip to all of you is slow down. Even if you feel like you're going slow, you should still probably go slower. And even when you think you started going slow, make sure you don't pick up pace going through your speech. Sometimes, even if you start slow, you'll end up going quickly by the time your speech is done. Don't be afraid to pause, put emphasis, add inflection and tone variance to your speech. Those kinds of small performance changes are what's really going to get you the most points in this category. Finally, the last section that you're being evaluated on changes depending on if you're the first speaker or the second speaker. If you're the first speaker, you'll be evaluated on your closing summary. When determining the points for this, the judge will ask themselves, which team did a better job of summarizing the issues at stake and presenting conclusive final cases? If you're the second speaker, this last section you're being evaluated on is cross-examination. When determining the points for this section, the judge will likely ask themselves, which team used cross-examination to better support and develop their arguments? If you're the second speaker, don't just ask open-ended questions. Rather, ask directed ones that help set up the rebuttal speech that you're going to give. This will really help show the judge that you understand your arguments. Okay, next up, I want to answer some frequently asked questions. Over the last couple of weeks, I've attended some of your practices, and there's common questions between your schools that I think everyone would benefit from having the answer to. So I've divided these up into sections based on what speech the questions are about. Let's run through these really quickly. The first few questions that I get are not about anything that's going to happen in your debate, but rather about the tournament overall. So, who will be the judges? The judges for this tournament are going to have a number of backgrounds. Some of them will be financial experts, and some of them will be our usual volunteer judges and coaches. Regardless of their background, though, they will all be using the same ballot to judge you. So whether you get a financial expert or a financial noob, you'll still want to give your speech the same way. Ultimately, you're being evaluated on how much you could tell them, not how much they could tell you. Do my cases need to be finished? At this point, yes. A few weeks ago, it was okay to just have an outline, but at this point, your cases should be fully drafted, with only minor tweaks happening between now and the tournament. If the judge knows debate, is it okay to use debate terms or speed? As I mentioned a second ago, no. Even if you do have a debate judge in the back, you're still being evaluated on a very particular rubric and not traditional debate standards. Spreading or using debate terms are going to hurt your style points regardless of who the judge is in the back of the room. But that's a good question. Next, I want to answer some questions that folks had about the case speeches. First, a lot of people were asking, can trade schools be considered for two-year cases? In short, yes. You could definitely base one of your contentions around trade schools, since they're a subset of two-year colleges. Another common question that people had about their case speeches was, if they needed to defend that the student at the 2-year wanted to transfer to a 4-year. Both of these questions are kind of trying to get at the same thing, and that is it okay to make arguments about going directly to your career after finishing at the 2-year? And the answer is yes. That's okay and allowed. In your first case speech, I would probably lean on having a diversity of arguments, and transferring is going to be a strong argument against the 4-year debaters. So I wouldn't exclude it, at least not at the beginning of the round. Finally, can we specify what type of 4-year we defend? Selective versus non-selective schools. So for this one, you can specify or just defend one of those in the case speech, but if during the rebuttal speech, your opponents point to the example that you didn't use as a reason against the 4-year case, you will need to defend against that point. So you don't need to create contentions around specific subsets of 4 years, but you do need to defend all of them as a general concept. Finally, do I need to use the full speech time? I would use as much of the speech time as you could. If you have time left over, there's plenty of ways to fill that time in. For example, you could define more terms that you use during your speech. You could give more examples of how the impact of your case could affect an individual person. There's a lot of places that you could fill in the time with. If you still have time after doing all of that, then that's okay. Just don't leave too much on the table. The next set of questions that people were asking were about cross-ex. Surprisingly, one of the first questions that I got from a lot of people was, do I need to be nicer in cross-ex? And to answer that, while I will always encourage you to be respectful of your opponents and the debate space, you do not need to be monotonous and boring. Passion and energy can be a good thing. You just don't want to push it too far. But yeah, definitely feel free to have some style, and don't be afraid to put emphasis on your arguments. Second, what can I do to get good score in cross-ex? Well, for that one, I would say, first, don't be afraid to clearly signal what arguments you're setting up for your rebuttal speech. If you're asking questions during cross-ex, that also means that you're going to be giving the rebuttal speech. Because you're about to give the rebuttal speech against their case, highlighting your knowledge in cross-ex will only help make your speech easier for the judge to comprehend. Use cross-ex to your advantage to set up your rebuttal speeches and the arguments that you're going to make in your rebuttals. You don't need to play sly and try to hide your arguments during cross-ex. Try to make them as clear as possible. That way, the judge will award you points for it. These debates are all about highlighting your knowledge. Then, is tag team allowed? Because cross-examination is functionally a speech, you should not be doing tag team cross-ex. It will only hurt you and your partner's score overall. Imagine if you got up during your partner's 1AC and started having to fill in some of that. That's basically what you would be doing if you were to do tag team in this format. Next, should I prepare my questions in advance? In general, I would say yes, you could go in with some prepared questions, but don't be afraid to respond to where the debate goes. By this, I mean, even if you go in with some prepared things, if your opponent makes arguments that you want to take advantage of, don't be afraid to change course a little bit. You want to have some flair in your responses. Make it memorable. You'll probably be able to predict some common questions that you'll hit every round. So having a witty retort will go a long way. For example, there's this great quote by the writer Shelby Foote where he says, "A university is just a group of buildings gathered around a library." A quote like that could be used on either side of this debate, whether you're comparing the prestige of a 2-year versus a 4-year college, or a selective versus non-selective 4-year college. Giving the judge something to walk away with and quote you on is going to be the difference in how you earn those last few style points. Folks also had some questions about the rebuttals. Let's see what those questions were. First, do I extend my case for this speech? In short, no. The rebuttal should only be responding to your opponent's case. You don't extend your case in the rebuttal speech. You save that for the closing statement. Should my rebuttal be pre-written? Because a lot of the contentions that you're going to be debating against are going to be predictable, I would say yes, you should pre-write good portions of your rebuttal. But with that being said, you don't have to be stiff like a brick. Always be aware of what's going on in the debate overall. Third, I have time left over in my debate. What can I do with it? Well, if you have leftover time in your rebuttal, You should define some of the terms that you were using during that speech, and make sure that you're clear when you reference your opponent's arguments. Go slower and use the they say, we say format. They say that 4 years have higher earning potential in the long run, but they don't take into account that after 2 years you could go directly into the workforce. This adds up, etc., etc. The best way to make sure that you have strong line by line on either side of this debate is to make sure that you have an accurate flow. More than any other speech, the rebuttal is going to lean heavily on your flow. Finally, should I refute claims made in cross-ex? You can, but that's ultimately up to you. I would err on the side of caution and definitely answer some of the things that were happening in cross-ex, just because you don't want that to pop back up later after you don't have a chance to respond anymore. After the rebuttals, folks had some questions about the closing speeches. This is a good question. Do I need to extend all of my contentions? The answer is no. You just need to pick the 1 or 2 best ones that you think are going to be enough to win you the debate. Remember, the closing summary consists of reasons why you win the debate, and you should be extending your case while closing the door on your opponent's case. Narrow it down to a few contentions. That way you could focus on just the most strategic arguments. The closing statement should summarize and crystallize the main arguments in the debate. You should give the judge an easy way to vote for you at this point. Another question people had about the closing speech was, if I have time left over, what can I do with it? Well, with the closing speech, it's already a very short speech. If you have more time left over, perhaps consider extending an additional contention. Or make sure that you defined all of the financial terms that you were using throughout the debate. Or just put some more work tearing down your opponent's case. Okay, now that I've answered most of your common questions and we've reviewed the structure and format of a debate round, I want to look at the format for the tournament day. The day of the tournament will last from about 9 o'clock to about 4:30. Here you can see the schedule of the day on your screen now. Remember that cases and rebuttal drafts are due in the Google Drive folder located at finlit.lambda.org. Again, upload your final cases to the Google Drive by Friday evening. The tournament will take place on February 6th. There will be 5 rounds in total on Saturday. 3 of them will happen before lunch, so from 9:30 to 1. The last 2 debates will happen after your meal break between 2 and 4:15. After we have all the results in, we'll have an award ceremony awarding the top speakers and announcing the finalists for the final round that will happen on February 11th on YouTube. Whether or not you make it to the final round, everyone who's competing in this tournament should definitely come watch the final round. It'll be a fun way to wrap up this tournament, but also we'll be doing some giveaways. So if you want some cool merch, make sure you come check it out. With that, what do you have left to do between now and the tournament? At this point, most things that you need to do should be done by now, but just in case. First, make sure that your contentions are all cleaned up and that they all tie back to a financial impact. Then, make sure that you revise and save the most recent version of your cases and upload those to the Google Drive. The Google Drive, again, is at finlit.lambda.org. Remember to use the correct naming structure. Your file name should start with the school, then which side of the debate you're on, and then finally you and your partner's name. Lastly, try to write and organize rebuttals to the best of your knowledge. There's going to be a lot of common contentions that you were able to predict that you could write rebuttals out for, even if you don't see everyone's case. And that's all I've got for this one. I'll see you on Saturday, and good luck. I hope you all have a fun time this weekend at the gym. See you soon.